the first thing I thought that would make sense that I wanted to quickly take a look at and talk about, since we just opened Maze of Millennia, I felt like it made sense to talk about another card that was in Maze of Millennia. We didn't pull it, unfortunately, but the card is Transaction Rollback, and after Bonfire, it is probably the most impactful new card in Maze of Millennia. So, and there has been, I noticed it this morning, and people have been asking me in chat about it, so I figured we might as well do a small segment on stream about it to just clarify some things. And we're going to do that right now. Is it going to be on Spotify? It is going to be on Spotify. Yes, it is also going, it's going to have its own YouTube channel, and it's going to be on Spotify as well. So yeah. Dude, it was just an ancient chant and an Eye of Illusion. I think you're good. You should try that gambit another time. Try that gambit, like try that when we actually pull like a thrust or something like that, you know. But thank you for the 8 months. Also, Siat, thank you for the prime as well. The YouTube channel hasn't been set up entirely yet, so I can't link it to you yet, but I will make sure you guys can get the links to whatever platform you want to watch the podcast on or listen to the podcast on at some point. Okay, so the reason why I thought of doing this was because I saw Tombox uploaded a video this morning, and I figured we might as well just take a look at what he says, because he's doing a lot of ruling based content, I think. And I don't think we've actually watched an MST TV video on these kind of things ever in the past, so I'm curious about how he's kind of, you know, talking about this entire situation, because there is some things that are not clear about Bonfire, and even though I've been playing this game for a long time, sometimes there are rulings that I don't feel comfortable, you know, giving you guys a decisive answer about, because I'm not the ruling kind of guy. But yeah.
Today's ruling video is all about Transaction Rollback, or Fake Feather, or Trap of Darkness, or Labyrinth Barrage. They're the same thing. It's a trap card copying the activated effect of a different trap card. Hey guys, this is Tombox, and welcome to the ruling video. I know why you're here, because you don't want to look like the fool when you're arguing with an inferior duelist about Transaction Rollback. I know it's gonna happen because there's a lot of complexity to this card. How does the copying work? What can you copy? What can't you copy? How does it even resolve? All that will be answered within the 4 ruling questions that I'm gonna give you. I'm gonna see how you guys will tackle this.
Oh, it's a quiz. Okay, even better. I didn't know that. Okay, that's perfect. Just for context, I don't know, do we show the card at some point? All right, let me pull up the card just so we have context for everyone. Transaction Rollback. Transaction Rollback. Before we do any of it, let us look at the effect together. Let me make sure you guys can see that. All right. So, pay half your life points, target a normal trap in your opponent's graveyard except Transaction Rollback. This effect becomes that card's activation effect. You can banish this card from your graveyard and pay half your life points, then target a normal trap in your graveyard except Transaction Rollback. This effect becomes that card's activation effect. You can only use 1 Transaction Rollback effect per turn and only 1 stat turn. For the matter of this ruling, whatever, it doesn't matter which of the 2 effects you're using, whether you're copying your opponent's trap or your own trap. The question that often happens is when, like, you're talking about copying another card's effect, right, is not the same as copying everything that is written on the card, because there is text on a card that is not part of its actual effect, right? Things such a thing as the cost of a card, which if you activate one card that just copies the effect of another card, it does not copy the cost. You typically, the way this works is you don't have to pay the cost of that card, which leads to the ability to copy a card like, I don't know, Phoenix Wingwind Blast, which its cost is discard 1 card from your hand, then target a card on the field and put it back to the top of the deck, right? But it can be, I do understand why this kind of stuff is confusing, because you don't have to pay the cost when you copy the effect of Phoenix Wingwind Blast, right? Which is something that happens before the effect, right? Which is cool. But another thing that happens before you resolve the actual effect and is not actually part of the effect is the targeting part, right? Like it's you have to announce a target before resolving the effect, right? And what happens if I try to copy the if I try to copy a card like Phoenix Wingwind Blast, you know, I don't have to pay the cost, but how does it work if I have to select a target and all that kind of stuff? And I just want to say stuff like this can even be confusing to veteran players, even to myself. Sometimes I have to go back and be like, hey, what exactly was the interaction here, right? Targeting isn't cost. Yes, that is also something that is true. Even though a lot of people refer to everything that is written before the semicolon in a card's text, they refer to it as cost, but targeting, like for example, let me just pull up Phoenix Wingwind Blast because it's the card we just talked about. Phoenix Wingwind Blast. Phoenix Wingwind Blast. And it is, this sort of stuff is very weird and confusing. I will say it. I do think so myself, that this kind of stuff is confusing. This card reads, discard one card, then target one card your opponent controls, semicolon, place that target on the top of the deck. Now, this is the effect of the card. This is the effect. Place that target on the top of the deck. But everything in front of the semicolon is not... This is not all cost. The cost for this card is only this. This is the cost for Phoenix Wingwind Blast. Discard one card. This is not something that is regarded to as cost. This is just an activation requirement, which is different, right? Everything before the semicolon is this card's activation requirement. Part of the card's activation requirement is the cost. The other part of its activation requirement is targeting a card your opponent controls, right? Which is, I understand that it's confusing. I agree with you. I'm just trying to break it down in a simple way, right? This is the entire text of the card. This is its effect, right? This is the activation requirement for the effect. And this is the cost. All right? And this is what's very often confusing about transaction rollback, because what exactly happens if you try to copy Phoenix Wingwind Blast with transaction rollback, right? Because, you know, what exactly do you copy? What do you have to do? Can you even do it if you don't have to pay the cost? Do you fulfill the activation requirements? All that kind of stuff, right? So yeah, that's what we're talking about.
Just to see who's actually gonna be the fool when it comes to this particular question. And if you're a judge, how are you gonna answer it? But anything related to transaction rollback will be in this video. So if you're gonna enjoy this one, hit that thumbs up button, hit subscribe, ding that notification bell, and let's go through some transaction rollback. Question number 1, this is pretty basic. We have transaction rollback in the graveyard with a Horn of the Phantom Beast. If you guys don't know what Horn of the Phantom Beast does, it targets one beast or beast warrior monster you control. Equip this card to that target. It gains 800 attack. Pretty basic stuff. And if the equipped monster destroys opponent's monster by battle and sends it to the graveyard, you get to draw one card. That part of the effect is mandatory, which is also pretty nice. Now, so on the field, there's a Reborn Tengu, which is a Beast Warrior, so Horn of the Phantom Beast technically can target it to give it that nice, sweet 800 boost. And on the opposing side, there is a 1700 attack Airlifter. Consider it as a vanilla, as it's not relevant to this case. So we're going to proceed into the battle phase. Player A declares an attack with the Reborn Tengu into...
You see, this is immediately the first question. And I'm gonna be honest with you, I am not 100% sure. Okay. I guess, let me, okay.
Airlifter. And on attack declaration, player A goes, oh, I'm going to pay half my life points to draw that one card, so I'm going to banish the transaction rollback, pay half our life points, and target the Horn of the Phantom Beast. And in turn...
Okay, so what they're trying to do is they're trying to copy Horn of the Phantom Beast to target, to equip to the Reborn Tengu, which I am 99% sure does not work. Because we poll. I don't want to poll it. We can poll it. If one of the mods in chat want to do a poll on each of these questions, you can do so. Feel free to do so. Listen to the options. Oh, do they give you options?
During the resolution, he attempts to target his own monster and then gets the attack boost. However, player B just counters the argument here by saying, hey, you can't target a card during resolution. That doesn't make any sense. So they have an argument. They call a judge. Who's right, who's wrong, Who's the actual fool in this particular scenario? You have 5 seconds to answer. And this
I think the answer is that they're both wrong. Like, I think you can't use it, but the reason is not that you can't target at resolution. Because I think the reason is that you simply can't equip the thing. It doesn't work, but it doesn't work for a different reason than what the two are arguing about in this hypothetical scenario.
This one's, yeah, I know, it's a little bit tricky. 4, 3, 2.
And chat is 70%. 70% say it's not possible to activate transaction rollback on Horn of the Phantom Beast.
1, 0. They're both fools for different reasons. Well, player A's reason is that he targeted an illegal card. Horn of the Phantom Beast, yes, is a normal trap card. However, this particular trap card converts itself into an equip. It's an equip card, and this card also references itself. Equip this card to that target.
Yeah.
Now, when you banish the transaction...
So the thing is, technically, you can equip one card from the graveyard to another card. That is something that I think a lot of cards do that, like Infernobles. It is possible to equip a card from the graveyard to a monster on the field as an equip card. That technically works if a card had that effect. But transaction rollback is not this card. That would be in this case, because transaction rollback copies Horn of the Phantom Beast. It would have to be the transaction rollback that equips itself to the Reborn Tengu, which would be very weird. I don't think that's possible. Like, the transaction rollback would have to become the Horn of the Phantom Beast equip card, basically, which is that is what doesn't work, I think, because Horn of the Phantom Beast states equip this card to it, and transaction rollback is not this card. That's why it doesn't work.
Rollback,
I think
you're not going to be able to equip the card. So
yeah,
that's pretty simple, pretty direct, and therefore the Horn of the Phantom Beast became an illegal target. And an old precedent to this would be Trap of Darkness and Kunai with Chain. Kunai with Chain has two effects. You can copy Kunai with Chain's battle position changing effect. However, you cannot use it to gain 500 attack and equip it to the monster. That part of the effect is basically not allowed.
Yeah.
So with that said, you can't basically equip cards and copy the equip cards through the copying effect of a trap card. Sorry, that was a little bit wordy there. Now, what about...
What if you use its on-field effect to copy the horn in the opponent's graveyard? It's a very good question. It's a very good question. So is the reason you cannot do that the fact that it's not in the graveyard anymore? Or is it just because in general you cannot copy another card that says this card? Like, is it in general you cannot do that kind of thing to any card that references do something with this card? I'm gonna be honest with you. I would say you could do that, but I am not very, very certain on that. But it's a very good question. I like that you asked that question. It's a good. I don't know. I genuinely don't know, but I think that might be possible.
Player B. Why was player B the fool?
But I'm not sure.
Well,
I'm genuinely not sure.
Can't resolve and target a card, but that would basically shut out 90% of all the cards you can attempt to use with transaction rollback. So how does transaction rollback resolve? Essentially, when you activate transaction rollback's copying effect, okay, so you say use the graveyard effect, you banish it, pay half your life, target a card. We're gonna switch up the card now with Raigeki Break, a very basic trap card that destroys a card on the field, but you do need to target. Now note, when you copy the effect of an activated effect of a trap card.
So this is the exact Wing Blast scenario from earlier, which I believe the way this works, and in general the way transaction rollback works, and I believe this is a Konami said so ruling, so it doesn't have to be the most intuitive to you guys. You obviously copy the effect. You don't have to pay the cost, but I think the thing that Konami said so is that if the card has an activation requirement, not the cost, but an activation requirement like targeting, like declaring spell cards with Eradicator, you can do that at the moment, like you do that. When when you activate that card, right? So, and this is a I think this is a Konami said so ruling. You don't have to pay the cost, so you don't have to discard the card, but you do get to target a card in the field.
You don't pay the cost. So you don't, discard cards, you don't pay life, you don't send anything to the graveyard. You just have to perform the activation.
And I believe you still target at active, which would be, it's weird. I agree with you. It's very unintuitive. You do have to target at activation of transaction rollback, even though transaction rollback has not become Raigeki Break yet. You already target a card on the field that you would try to destroy if transaction rollback were to resolve and become Raigeki Break. Which is, I agree with you, it is confusing, and that's why we're doing this.
What about the targeting? Isn't targeting part of the cost? No, not everything before the semicolon is a cost. Everything you have to do when activating...
That's what we just talked about.
The card is written before the semicolon. That's the attempting of the activation, which includes targeting, declaring card types, choosing a card effect if it says activate one of these following effects. Now, when copying effect, you don't pay cost, but you still need to target and do all the declarations. So if there's no valid target, you cannot activate the card or effect. Now, here's an extra note. When you're activating cards in general, if you can't pay the cost, obviously you can't activate the card. If you can't do everything before the semicolon, you also cannot activate the card, with one exception. If you have a mandatory effect, a trigger effect such as Trap Tricks Myrmilia that requires targeting, but if there's no targets, you would basically just skip the targeting and then it would resolve with no effect. It's still
another very old school example of this is like a Thunder King Ryo attacking over a Sangan. The Sangan is mandatory, it will activate, even though Thunder King Ryo is on the board and you can't search right now, and then simply it's going to resolve without effect, right? Whereas if you attack over an optional searcher, you can't even attempt to activate it. I don't know which one, well, I can't think of one that is optional right now, but like you couldn't activate those, we all know that, right?
Activates though. So when you banish transaction rollback, pay half your life, target Raigeki Break, when you target the Raigeki Break, you would also need to target for Raigeki Break as well. So you would banish transaction rollback, target Raigeki Break, and through that, within the same timing, you would also target a card on the field.
Isn't Diamond Dude's effect similar to the trap? Diamond Dude, unless there's some crazy difference, Diamond Dude would be the exact same thing, but for spell cards, yeah. So like if you send a Destiny draw from the top of your deck to the graveyard, we all knew back in the day you didn't have to discard a Destiny hero for it. But let's say you would send a Soul Taker that is target and then destroy a monster, right? Which targeting happens before you activate it. You can still use it with Diamond Dude, right?
Does that make sense to you guys? And so when you resolve transaction rollback, you'll be able to destroy the card. In the case where you negate transaction rollback, then you negated the copy effect. It essentially does nothing. So that's how you kind of work around the activation timing of certain cards that require you to declare stuff or require you to target stuff. So no, you're not targeting during resolution. You still get to perform the targeting during the activation part, even though you haven't fully copied the effect, but you still need to fulfill the requirements of the card. All right, does that make sense? If it doesn't, leave it down in the comment section. We'll try to get into it a little more. Now let's move on. Question number 2, we're gonna keep it simple here. We have in the graveyard a transaction rollback and a copy of Harpy's Featherstorm. And so the opponent essentially has a free turn ahead of them, but there are these 2 trap cards in the way. Player A decides to activate the transaction rollback, pay half their life to essentially skip the opponent's turn by hopefully resolving the Harpy's Featherstorm. So he banishes it, pays half his life, targets the Harpy's Featherstorm, tells the opponent, hey, now you can't do anything, I don't have to pay cost. So here we are, you're stuck under Harpy's Featherstorm. Player B says, hey, you can't do that.
Once again, I'm only like 90% sure on this ruling, but I think Harpy's Featherstorm, if this does not work the way I think it does, then I'm gonna be confused again. But because Harpy's Featherstorm, we already established cost you don't have to pay, activation requirement like targeting and such you do need to fulfill when you use transaction rollback. And if you control a winged beast on Harpy's Featherstorm is not a cost. It's not something you pay before activating or when activating. It is that, I think, is part of the activation requirement, like targeting. So I think in that case, I don't think it works on Harpy's Featherstorm unless you have a Wind Winged Beast. Then it does work.
Well, you call it judge. You're the judge. This one's pretty simple. You have 3 seconds to answer this. Who is correct in this case? 3, 2, 1, 0. Player A is the fool for attempting to copy Harpy's Featherstorm without any monsters on the field. If you did control
not that one, please, not Eaglin.
Then yes, that activation would have been legal. Yeah. But in this particular presented case, there's no Wind Wing Beast on the field, so transaction rollback will basically target an illegal card in this case because it doesn't meet the condition. If you're going to be copying the activated effect of a trap card, even though you don't have to pay cost, condition is different. You still have to meet the condition of that card for its timing, for the required monsters. Essentially, you're copying every part of its activated condition as well. So you can't just blindly go say, hey, I
do think once you understand the difference between cost and activation requirement, and once you get into your head that transaction rollback ignores the cost, but you still need to do the activation requirement like the rest of the thing, I think then it becomes relatively simple, right? The same is true for Eradicator. You're like, okay, you can copy Eradicator, you simply don't have to tribute, and but the other part of the activation requirement, the declaring spells or traps, is something you have to do, and that's why it works.
Don't like my opponent's attack position monster. I'm going to copy Drowning Mirror Force to spin it all back into the deck. Well, your opponent still needs to declare a direct attack for you to copy transaction rollback onto that. Or say you don't like your opponent having a bunch of monsters on the field and they're in battle phase. Oh, I'm just going to copy Torrential Tribute to blow them all up. See, you can't do that again because you haven't summoned a monster, you're not in the proper timing. So no, if you're going to be activating a trap card that's going to
But do you still need a monster on the field for Eradicator? No, it's not an activation requirement for Eradicator to control a dark monster with 2500 or more attack. It's a cost you need to be able to pay if you have the card Eradicator. But transaction rollback allows you to ignore the cost. It doesn't allow you to ignore everything else that happens before the semicolon. So yeah,
copy another trap card, you still have to meet the condition.
I'm assuming because Eradicator is such a popular card, I'm assuming that's going to come up in the video anyways.
Still needs to be met. Question number 3. This is going to be a basic one, but you're going to see quite a bit of this happen probably during the initial release of transaction rollback. So we have a player combining 2 level 6s into an Xyz monster of Beatrice, Lady of the Eternal, and through the first effect, detach, sending the transaction rollback into the graveyard. And through the next turn, during the draw phase, they decide to shut down the opponent's turn by throwing in a Ghost Meets Girl, a masterful Mayakashi Shiranui Saga into the graveyard.
Okay, for that one, I need the text.
Card effect does tribute a Mayakashi or Shiranui Synchro or Link monster. Neither player can special summon monsters from the hand, deck, or extra deck for the rest of the turn. Essentially a floodgate that only allows...
Yeah, you can do that because the cost is just... It doesn't have any other activation requirement other than the cost of tributing a Mayakashi. You can do that.
Special summoning from the graveyard. You can still use a Reborn. However, player...
You should not be doing that, by the way. Please don't do that. Don't do that to me. But you could.
Does all that. Player B says, hey, you can't do that. And player A says, like, why? That's not an effect. That's a condition. This is very easy. So they argue, call a judge. This one should take you no time extensions whatsoever. You answer on the spot and you tell them, yeah, no, Ghost Meets Girl, that particular card, the cost is to use the Mayakashi and Shiranui Synchro monster or Link monster. That is a cost, so you don't have to pay that at all. But you do get to copy that particular effect and resolve it, and the effect is to lock people out, and that is not a condition. That is not like Gimmick Puppet locking you via a condition. This is part of the effect. Of course, someone's going to be pretty salty, and this is why I did wonder why Beatrice is still allowed because of transaction rollback. Maybe we're in a phase where, hey, we should be able to test it before we ban it kind of deal. Who knows? But then there's also the question of D-Barrier. So let's go for another Floodgate-esque card like D-Barrier. What happens when they activate a D-Barrier and then use transaction rollback? Can you transaction rollback an already active D-Barrier? And the answer is, yes, you can lock out 2 things, because transaction rollback isn't technically activating another copy of Dimensional Barrier. You're merely...
This is another good example about cards that say you can only activate one of these cards' effects like per turn. Like another big deal about this is big welcome labyrinth, because if it ever gets ashed, if you have a transaction rollback in the graveyard, you can still copy it again, because you are only copying the effect of big welcome labyrinth. You're not using another big welcome labyrinth. So this transaction rollback also goes around once per turn sort of clauses, right? Like it does not matter if you've activated a big welcome before. You're not activating another big welcome. You are copying another big welcome's effect, and that's not something that you are not allowed to do. You can't do that.
Just copying the effect of dimensional barrier, so it's all okay. You are still within the restriction of dimensional barrier, and you get to lock out both exceeds and synchro, maybe rituals plus fusions, whatever the case may be. Yes, you get to lock out 2 particular typing. So transaction rollback is going to make that particular disgusting play a bit of a reality. That's it for the basic breakdown of the 3 questions. But before we get into the complicated scenario, well, first of all, check out mstmerch.com if you want to help support this channel. Really appreciate it. It keeps basically all of this stuff running.
You know what? I'm gonna keep it running because we've just been react-anding to the rest, so might as well let him.
If you guys need your card game essentials such as sleeves, over sleeves, foil sleeves, I got you covered with the Carbon series. If you want, tournament level sleeves, white, pinks, black, they all feel like PC white, classic PC white. They feel like it. Very, very smooth shuffle feel. Then go for the Carbon series. If you want to get some beautiful foil sleeves designed by me, yes, I designed them myself, and you want to protect them, go for the bundles. They're really, really awesome. Now, there's also the product that
not the Mind Hacker
collection, the Divider Kit. That's the thing that kickstarted the entire store, and I'm really happy for the support. Even stores have bought them as well to sort their own store collection. So if you guys want to sort your stuff, go get the Divider Kit. We've got mats as well, and we got new upcoming products, new lines, new colors for the Carbon series, new foil sleeves coming up, so you guys definitely don't want to miss out. Check out mstmerch.com. Thank you for your support, and here we go. Let's
move on.
Complicated stuff. Transaction rollback in the graveyard plus eradicator epidemic virus.
Oh, we've already talked about that. Okay, well,
a complicated one. So the players have set this particular scene up, and player A doesn't care if they're Sky Striker, Cash Tira.
Okay, I mean, we don't have to. We don't actually. We don't have to talk about it again. Short answer. Eradicator. Let me pull up the exact. I mean, is there going to be the?
They just want to blow up every single spell card in the opponent's hand,
Where's
so they go for Eradicator card act.
Tribute 1 dark monster with 2500 or more attack. This is cost. You don't have to pay the cost. Declare 1 type of card. This is not cost. This is just activation requirement. You're going to be able to activate Eradicator and declare a spell or trap and resolve it. Let it play. I mean, okay.
Virus. This is a complicated one. So the players have set this particular scene up, and player A doesn't care if they're Sky Striker, Cash Tira, or Rescue Ace. They just want to blow up every single spell card in the opponent's hand. So they go for Eradicator Epidemic Virus in the graveyard, and they are going to activate Transaction Rollback, copy the Epidemic Virus, the EEV, and try to call spell cards. And the opponent's like, hey, you can't do that. This is a complicated scenario. There's 2 outcomes to this entire thing. You guys have 5 seconds to give me an answer. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. So there's 2 outcomes to this because there's a conflicting ruling, and it's mainly because of Eradicator Epidemic Virus's card text in TCG, specifically stating its own card activation. We mentioned this: if a card references its own card activation and you try to copy it via an effect, you're not allowed to because there is no card activation. You can't essentially fulfill the resolution properly.
Hold up.
And so the card to reference is Extinction on Schedule. So you can use Trap of Darkness, Transaction Rollback to copy it if you're targeting directly as a card activation. If you have like these cards set onto the field, Transaction Rollback, you're copying your opponent's copy of Extinction on Schedule. That's completely fine because even though it mentions this card's activation, you are still under a card activation when you do the whole copying effect because you essentially did flip the card from face down on the field onto the field face up, or you activate it onto the field basically from a point where it was basically not public knowledge. Okay, so you activated a card. However, because extinction on schedule, now the card text states that during the main phase you pay 2,000 life points, you ignore that part, make both players send all cards they control to the graveyard at the end of the third battle phase after this card's activation. Now, because it mentions this card activation, Transaction Rollback's second effect, as well as Junk Collector's effect, they can't target Extinction on Schedule via that effect because you can't really mimic the card activation. So
that is something it's funny because it has nothing to do with what's before the semicolon in Eradicator Epidemic Virus, right? It has nothing to do with do I have to pay the cost? Do I have to declare, can I declare Spell Trap when I'm only copying the effect? This is only because Eradicator in its effect references 3 turns after this card's activation. And the interesting difference here, the important difference here that you have to realize is the difference between a card activation and an effect activation. When you flip over a card that's face down, a trap card, or you activate a spell card from your hand, you are activating a card. If you just banish a spell card from your graveyard to use an effect, that is not a spell card activation. That is a spell effect activation. That is a difference. Which matters also on a lot of negate cards, which is sometimes something that people miss. Certain cards only say, when your opponent activates a spell card, negate the activation and destroy it. Something like this. I believe one of those cards is Evolzar Lagia, for example, or Solemn Judgment, right? If your opponent banishes a spell card from the graveyard to use its effect, like what's an example of it? What's an example of a spell card that banishes itself from the graveyard to do something? Or add itself, Metal Foes Fusion. Metal Foes Fusion, activate the effect in the graveyard to shuffle itself back into the deck and draw a card, right? You cannot use Solemn Judgment on that, or Lagia on that, right? Which is something, most people know that, but just to clarify, the reason for that is because that is not, you are not activating a spell card. You are activating the effect of a spell card, which is different. This is interesting, right? This is interesting because if this is actually the ruling on transaction rollback and extinction of this on schedule in the TCG, just let that be clear. People are saying that in the OCG this is different because Eradicator's card text in the OCG is different and just says for the next 3 turns. This is not information that I actually know for 100% sure, but people in chat right now are saying there's a difference between Eradicator's text in the TCG and the OCG, because in the TCG we just read it, Eradicator clearly references this card's activation, right?
So that particular part of the card text matters, but what that translates to for Eradicator Epidemic Virus is that, you know, until the end of their 3rd turn after this card's activation, you can't fulfill that in TCG. This is something that's mentioned specifically.
Because specifically, transaction rollback, banishing itself from the graveyard, you are not activating a card. You are not activating a card. You are activating an effect. Which in return also means that theoretically, if your opponent had an Eradicator in the graveyard and you had a transaction rollback set, then you would 100% be able to do it, even in the TCG, no matter. Like you can do that because then you are activating a card. That's fine. Just like in the other example right now.
In TCG, it applies to deck devastation virus as well. So in other words, the graveyard effect of transaction rollback, you can't use that to copy an EEV. So a judge can rule that, hey, you can't use transaction rollback to target Epidemic Eradicator in the graveyard. You can still use it while it's on the field to copy your opponent's copy, but not your own copy.
Interesting.
But there's a possibility that the judge can rule that you can target Epidemic Eradicator Virus because there is a conflict. It's because there's a different ruling stating, hey, can I activate Labyrinth Barrage by chaining it to eradicator epidemic virus by declaring spells. Yes, you can. But then somehow within the answer of this particular ruling, it says that transaction rollback, either its card or its second effect, it can copy it, and you can even use Junk Collector to copy it as well.
What? Okay. So interesting.
That's where the conflict stems from. That's why you probably have to ask a head judge. And I know the whole thing was a giant word soup. If you don't get it, we'll see if we can try to explain it down in the comments section.
Hasn't mentioned.
But essentially, ask your head judge what you're not allowed.
Okay, so basically what they're saying is, by all the logic, or like by a lot of logic applied in the past in the TCG, because of the way Eradicator is worded in the TCG, it technically should not work. You could make a strong argument that you cannot copy your own Eradicator with transaction rollback, but it is not something we have confirmation on. Like 100% confirmation. We don't have a TCG ruling that says transaction rollback can copy Eradicator or can't copy Eradicator, is what they're saying.
To do it depending on which event that you go to, it may or may not change. They should be staying consistent overall in TCG.
In these kind of situations, I wish they would just put out, like, they would just make a decision for the TCG ahead of the card's release and just put it out there and just be like, yeah, this is how we're gonna do it. Which, I mean, if this other ruling, because I'm gonna be honest with you, if this other ruling is something that exists, right? The fact that you cannot copy extinction on schedule with your own Eradicator, with your own transaction rollback, if you can't do that, if that ruling exists, by that logic, I feel like you should not be able to copy Eradicator. Right? Simple as that, from my perspective. Like, if this is a ruling that exists, you can't copy extinction on schedule because it references this card's activation. Then you should not be able to activate to use it on Eradicator, is my logic. But apparently we just don't have confirmation that that's how they're gonna do it. Which, honestly, I'm very happy that we watched this, because I was not even aware that that was the reason people were asking for clarification on Eradicator. I just thought people didn't really know or got a good grasp of what is a cost, what is an activation requirement, which one you have to fulfill if you copy a card's effect, right? Which I think is good. We talked about those kind of things as well in the beginning, right? The simpler stuff. I feel like the simple things is something that everyone should basically know now. But the Eradicator thing, I'm very happy that we watched until the end, because I was not aware that there was a conflicting ruling. Because what is this ruling? When resolving Labyrinth Barrage, hold up, I activate Labyrinth Barrage by chaining it to Eradicator epidemic virus that was activated by declaring spells. Okay, what is Labyrinth Barrage? Labyrinth Barrage. Labyrinth Barrage. When you activate a set normal trap card except Labyrinth Barrage, this effect becomes that normal trap's effect when that card is activated. Wait, but didn't we just talk about how it's different when you activate the card when it's set? Because Labyrinth Barrage is a card you have set, so what exactly? The same also goes for activating Trap of Darkness, Fake Feather, or Transaction Rollback, either the card or its second. Oh, okay. So, Labyrinth Barrage chaining to Eradicator works. That does work. And it should work by all logic, right? It is a card activation, so it can reference this card's activation. That's fine. The thing that gets people confused here is that in the answer, they include other examples. They're like, Trap of Darkness also works, Fake Feather also works, which I don't know what those cards do, but I assume on activation they copy another trap effect. And then they say, or transaction rollback, the card or its second effect, which this is the part that's confusing people, because the second effect is what's not supposed to work. But they included it here in a ruling for a different scenario. They're like, yeah, you can also do this with transaction rollback, the card or its second effect. Which... the card works, but the second effect, by the logic applied, should not work. So this ruling is contradicting all the logic that we have and the other rulings. So genuinely, we just have to get an answer that is not contradicting, right? This isn't a TCG site. This isn't a TCG site. Well, if it's not a TCG site, then why does it matter? There's a note saying TCG might be different. Yeah, there is. This Q&A entry might not be applicable to the TCG. In the TCG, Eradicator Epidemic Virus refers to its own trap card activation. So, is this an OCG ruling? Because then, what's the problem? Like, if this is an OCG ruling, then it doesn't even matter for us. Right? It's the OCG database. Okay, so then it won't work in the TCG, most likely. I guess we just don't have confirmation. Yeah, okay, I guess that's the whole point. Yeah, we don't have confirmation. By every logic applied, it should not work in the TCG. How do I find out the OCG card text for Eradicator? To make sure it's different. Eradicator Epidemic Virus. How do I get like a clean translation of Eradicator from the OCG? Is there a resource for that? Like, I don't know those kind of things. Yugipedia? Okay, hold up. Yugipedia Eradicator. Okay, I'm here. Eradicator. And now what? Scroll down. Oh, here. Okay, okay. Tribute a dark monster with 2500 or more attack. Declare one type of card, spell trap. Look at your opponent's hand. All spell traps they control and all cards they draw for 3 of their turns, and destroy all cards of that declared type. Here. There's a difference in the text to the English one. It's a different text. It does not reference this card's activation in the OCG, which is why in the OCG this question doesn't really exist. It's clear that you can copy it with the second effect, right? We have different text in the TCG, which results in us having a situation where by our text, you should not be able to copy with the second effect of transaction rollback. Okay, got it. Okay. Oof, TCG ruling sometimes, man. Sometimes this stuff is... and this is why I get all of your guys' confusion, and that's why I think it's important we bring it up on stream every once in a while. Because this is complicated. It does make sense to me now. After seeing all of this kind of stuff, I do understand what's going on. So there is, from my perspective, there's only 2 possible outcomes to this that would make sense. The first outcome is that they simply make an announcement that because Eradicator is worded the way it is, you will not be able to copy Eradicator with the second effect of rollback. Because this is with the current text of Eradicator, this is what would make sense. This is the consistent ruling with the other rulings that we have. If Eradicator stays worded the way it is, you should not be able to copy it, because otherwise it would be very inconsistent with other rulings and other cards. The other option they have, obviously, is if they want the cards to work together, they would have to They would have to change the text on Eradicator. They would have to, or they could ban it. You know what? That's probably the best solution. I came up with solution number 3 that I think is the best. It takes the cake. Just ban it. Just ban Eradicator. Hey, what about? Why don't we talk about that? Huh? Why don't we just ban that thing? Yo, I figured out the solution just now. That's the one. Yeah, no, that's the best solution. Just emergency ban it and even tell people that's the reason. Yeah, there's ruling problems, you know. That card needs to go. Fair. Yeah, we do that. Easy. Okay. All right, good talk. Shout outs to Tombox for making that video, because I mean, even I needed to see that. Even I needed to see that because I was not aware of all the intricacies of freaking transaction rollback. So yeah, we absolutely did have to talk about that. We did have to talk about that. Fast forward to Josh getting rollback EEV'd in 2024. What is the wording on EEV in Master Duel? Is it, I'm assuming it's the OCG one? Or did they just use all the TCG text? I'm about to check. Hold up. Just out of curiosity, what is the text? Because I assume it's just gonna work because it works in the OCG. Like, it's even if it has the wrong text, it's probably gonna work like in the OCG. But I am curious what the text is in. Hold up, I'm looking it up. Why would it work? Because the Master Duel uses OCG rulings, period. That's the reason. Yeah. It does in fact have the TCG text until the end of their third turn after this card's activation. Yeah, it has the TCG text. But I'm gonna assure you, like 90%, I'm 90% sure whenever something like transaction rollback releases in the Master Duel, it's gonna work like in the OCG. I think like it's gonna function like the OCG. So yeah, that's gonna be another level of confusing if that ever happens, but we'll see about that.